Hey, what's up, you guys, and welcome back to the Televised podcast. My name is Anna, and today I'm coming to you with a bonus episode about this show that I just binge watched on Netflix. It's called Teenage Bounty Hunters. It is phenomenal when I tell you that it is so good. I loved it, and I wanted to talk about it because it lives in the same like place in my mind as so many of like my other favorite like teen kind of shows and movies that have come out over the past couple of years, and I just really wanted to share it because I don't know, it was just like such a fun easy binge over, like I watched it over like 2 days, I think 3 days. It's only 10 episodes. It's so good. It's great. And I just wanted to share it because I've seen people talk about it on my Twitter timeline, which is actually how I even really found out about the show. I don't normally look at like Netflix's originals. I'm normally not like a person that watches Netflix originals very much. But this one I did because I saw it on my Twitter timeline. Everybody was talking about it. Everybody was talking about Staple. So needless to say, I did not go into this show blind, but I did go in kind of really not knowing what to expect, which is great. So you know, if you haven't seen it yet, go watch it and then come back. I'll give you a quick spoiler-free little discussion really quick, and then you gotta go watch it, and then you have to come back. So basically, the premise of the show, it's like I said, it's called Teenage Bounty Hunters, and the show is about two twin girls, Sterling and Blair Wesley, and they kind of, after a night of hooking up with their boyfriends outside of their Catholic school or Christian school, whatever, they get into a car accident and accidentally stumble into a life of bounty hunting with this man named Bowser. And the show is great. It's about how they're trying to balance bounty hunting with school, and also just kind of like reflections of themselves. Like there's a lot of like self reflection, I guess. There's a lot of discussion because it's based in Georgia, so it's based in like white, rich, privileged Christian Georgia and Atlanta, and it's such a cool way to like kind of look at that area. And it's one thing that was really striking to me is that it was so poignant, especially about the times that we're living in right now, because there was a whole episode about a girl who was running around, and this isn't really necessarily a spoiler. There was an episode about a girl running around chopping heads off of Confederate statues, and I'm like, God, when was this show written? Because it feels like this past summer, and that's something that's really cool. Is obviously, you know, the things that have been happening this past summer are not new. But it feels like the show was released at just the right time to be so relevant, and yet also, you know, and not necessarily not, because sometimes when you try to make things too relevant, it doesn't necessarily work, because you're like, oh my God, I understand this was written 2 years ago, you know? But this like show somehow managed to be like literally of this time, even though I'm sure it was written, you know, last year or maybe even the year before. And it's so good. And I just totally recommend it. It's so great. And if you're not like a super religious person, it's more of like a commentary on kind of Christianity and stuff. I think it's really cool because the main characters, Sterling and Blair, have a really interesting relationship with religion and kind of how it plays into their lives, which is really fun. So I think it's absolutely worth a watch if you have, you know, a day or two. You could probably get this knocked out in a day. I am a slow binger, so I had to take like 2 or 3 days, but you could get this show knocked out in a day, and it is phenomenal. It's so good. And God, that finale, I'm going to talk about it later, but the finale is everything. It is so good. And it's cool too because it's got like a mystery. It's great. It's such a great show. It's so good. But anyway, I'm going to kind of start talking about spoilers right now. Like I said, if you haven't seen the show, please go watch it. But if you have, please stick around, and I'm going to talk about some of my favorite things that I noticed about the show while I was watching it. I'm not necessarily maybe going to go into, uber specifics about every single episode, but I just wanted to talk about some things that made me really love this show. Because not every single show that I watch, I talk about on my podcast. So if the show inspired me to talk about it, there has to be a reason, so I'm gonna kind of go through that. Okay, so starting at the pilot, there's a moment in the pilot that I think everyone probably was like, whoa, wait a damn minute, what is happening? There's a moment where Sterling and Blair have this like twin telepathy, and they're literally talking to each other. Well, it's like they're talking to the camera, but they're talking to each other and no one else can hear them. So they are communicating via like twin telepathy. And I was so thrown by this because I was like, what kind of show is this? And it's kind of crazy because there's nothing else like supernatural about the show. There's nothing else like kind of crazy about the show. I mean, obviously it's about teenagers who become bounty hunters, so it's not totally grounded in reality, but I was like so thrown by that. I was like, what am I watching? But it's crazy because it works. It works so well. The like twin telepathy thing, it works so well because when you have these two main characters, you're not necessarily going to understand like each of their like struggles that they're going through, especially internally, and it makes a really cool opportunity for a lot of like dramatic irony where obviously the audience is clued in to how Sterling and Blair are feeling and what they know and what they're talking about and what they're doing, but the rest of the characters have no idea. And so I think that's really it's a really cool thing, and I just was not expecting it from this show, especially, and this is where we kind of get into heavy spoilers, but especially after that twist at the end, you're like, wait a minute, they're not even twins. So like, how are they doing this? And then of course you find out that the mom, Debbie and Dana, that they're twins, and that Dana is Sterling's mom. And so they have the twin telepathy thing, but I'm just like, wait, like, then how are Sterling and Blair doing that? Like, it's so cool. It's so cool, and it also presents a really cool conversation about what being sisters means, and I think that is something that could be obviously explored in a season 2, and really in depth, because Sterling, and I'm jumping way ahead of myself, but like Sterling finding out that she's not even Blair's twin, like they thought that they had like shared the womb, and they have this twin telepathy, and it just brings up so many more questions than answers. And it obviously, I mean, it's going to make her question her relationship with Blair, and make her question her relationship with her parents, and probably make her question herself just as a person, because your whole identity is like just shattered in that moment when you find out that your mom is not your mom. Like, what? And you're not even twins, which is again like something that has been your reality for your whole entire life. And like I said, then how come you can do the twin telepathy thing even though you're not twins? It's crazy. But but I thought that was a really interesting aspect to the show that I wasn't expecting at all. I was like, this is insane. What? So one thing about the show that I also love is that it is endlessly funny. It is so funny. And one thing that is cool to me is that I think it lives in the same world for me as like Booksmart. And I don't mean like they're part of the same universe. Like, that's not what I mean. But I mean like, in the sense that they're both these like teenage comedies, like coming of age kind of stories, and they both understand like Gen Z humor so well. Like Booksmart understood it so well, and so does Teenage Bounty Hunters. The way that they are able to, because listen, it's hard to make a show for teenagers when you're not a teenager. So it's really cool to watch both Booksmart and Teenage Bounty Hunters and see how they're able to connect to that younger audience, and without making it feel like cringe or like they're trying to push too hard, because it is hard to understand like a humor of an entirely different like generation than you know, like I'm a part of Gen Z, and like the humor is weird. Like, have you ever been on TikTok? Like, it's people post videos of a Dorito chip sitting in a bathtub with Mr. Brightside playing in the background, and it has like 1 million likes because it's just funny. And it's just funny because both of these pieces of media have somehow managed to like capture that kind of humor, obviously without being like, oh look, here's a Dorito in a bathtub, you know. It's not like directly, but it's in a way that feels consumable and accessible and relatable to this younger audience, which is so cool. And it feels like both of these shows truly understand kind of the mindset of our generation, especially like looking through the eyes of like Blair and Sterling, who are both, you know, they're both growing up in this really Republican, really Christian area, but you know, they have like all of, you know, they're both clearly very like liberal and stuff, and they even have scenes where Blair starts fights with her grandpa, which is something that I wouldn't do, but my sister would do. I'm definitely more of a Sterling, like, just leave it alone. Please, just leave it alone. I don't want to talk about it. But, and I kind of see that also with Molly and Amy from Booksmart, where, you know, they're, even though that takes place in a totally different area, you know, it's so cool how those kinds of characters are captured and how they feel so relatable and so real. And these people feel like people that you would know, even though they're very heightened and you know, different to maybe how anybody would ever be in real life. But, you know, they just feel like people that you could actually like hang out with and talk to, and they just feel real, you know, which is something so cool. So another thing that I wanted to talk about was how this show subverts stereotypes, which is also something that happens in Booksmart so much, and I think is part of the reason why both of those pieces of media, and I promise I'll stop talking about Booksmart soon, how both of those pieces of media kind of go above and beyond their teenage genres, because a lot of the times teenage shows, they rely on stereotypes, and they rely on these like archetypes and these assumptions that we all have. They just rely really heavily on that. Like, look at Pretty Little Liars. It's like, oh, they had the gay one, the pretty one, the dumb one, the smart one, and the, you know, and the missing one. So, you know, you have all of these like archetypes and stereotypes that these teen shows really rely on to connect in kind of like a lazy way to people, you know? So I think it's really cool that Teenage Bounty Hunters was able to take basically all of their characters and subvert everyone's expectations of them, basically. I mean, one of the biggest examples of this is Miles. Just Miles as a character, because, you know, you see him for the first time and he works at the country club, and he, you know, is like Black, and he's working at this like scary Republican white man country club place, and you know, even like Blair assumes that, okay, well, you're working here because you're not rich and this and that and whatever. But then later we find out that his mom is like the senator, and his dad like is owner of a bank or something, and he's like crazy stupid rich. like richer than Blair and Sterling. And it's just crazy because it's like, whoa. And Blair's even like, oh, you said your mom worked 2 jobs. And he's like, yeah, she's a senator and she's something else. I can't remember. But it was just so funny because it's like, oh shit, like he totally flipped that stereotype on its head, especially because we saw Blair being so uncomfortable having him around her house, because she was like, oh my god, I don't want him to think that I'm like stuck up and rich and bratty and stuff, even though he's like richer and than her. It was just a moment where it was really cool to see that stereotype be subverted, as well as later I think in the finale, or maybe episode 9, I can't remember, but one of those like last 2 episodes, Blair shows up at Miles's house, and she's gonna profess her love for him, and she does at family dinner, and he's got like 1 million butlers and the house is crazy, and his mom turns to him and she says, who is this? And she's like crushed. Blair is just like crushed because she's like, you didn't even tell her about me. And he's like, listen, Blair, your parents are white Republicans. My mom is a Democratic senator. I'm not trying to tell her that I'm sleeping with the enemy. And that is so funny because it subverts the stereotype of, because most of the time with like shows or movies or whatever, it always has to be like the black boyfriend who sneaks around the Republican parents, but he was always at Blair and Sterling's house. He was always there, and even though there was obviously that awkward interaction with her mom, with Debbie, about diversity and different cultures, he was never like hidden there. She never made the effort to hide him. It was actually him hiding her, which again was another like way to flip these stereotypes on its head and maybe not surprise, but to tell the viewers that this is a different kind of reality that, contrary to what we see on TV most of the time, so that was really cool. Another point about Blair that I wanted to make is that so obviously I said at the beginning that on my Twitter timeline I was seeing things about gays in Teenage Bounty Hunters, and I was like, okay, I mean, I'm down. And when I first started watching the show, I was like, Blair's gay. She's the gay one. Because obviously in the first episode you see Sterling boning her boyfriend in the parking lot, and Blair doesn't actually do it. And also Blair just, and not to be stereotypical, but the way that Blair dresses is just like, she's, kind of the outsider. She's like, looks very like alt, and that kind of style, and to be that at a Catholic or Christian, school, it brings up things. You're like, And also they drop some clues. I promise this didn't just come out of the fact that I looked at her and I was like, yeah, gay. At one point in the show, Blair is talking to Jennings and she's trying to fall in love with Jennings, and even that storyline is like, come on, that's gay. You try to make yourself fall in love with this man like because of heteronormativity. But so she's trying to fall in love with Jennings, and he says, you're like the prettiest girl in school, and she's like, you too. He is also the prettiest girl in school. And then later when she's with Miles, which is kind of when the suspicion starts teetering off, for sure. But she had brought a wig to go stalk her mom, to see what the hell her mom was up to. And Miles was so bored of watching her mom just sit there. So he's like, you know what, I'm going to go. And she's like, okay. But we didn't even get to the part where we got to be spies and we got to bang. And he's like, okay, well, what about tomorrow? And she's she's like, okay. And he's like, but bring the wig. And she's like, only if you wear it. And it's like, come on. Oh my God. That's gay. But I thought that was cool that they took, all of these stereotypes, all of these like little clues and stuff, and they fully like were like, nah, not that one. You got the wrong one. Because then we go on to Sterling, who, and even Blair says it, she just looks and is the kind of girl who would be married by like 23 and pregnant at 25 or 24 or whatever. Like who would just like go to like a nice state college, meet a nice boyfriend, probably her high school boyfriend, and get married and have kids. And that's just like the stereotype of kind of what you like. She's got the cardigans, she's got the blonde hair, she's just like innocent, she doesn't curse all that much. It's just kind of like the image that like comes up when you think of her. Everybody knows a Sterling. Everybody knows someone like Sterling in their neighborhood, in their community. And it's just so funny then for that episode where it's the debate episode, and it's great. It's so good, but because they're talking about how she's never had an orgasm before, and then she finally has one when she's thinking about April yelling at her and like grabbing her arm. That's insane. That was literally insane. My jaw was like on the floor. I was like, what? Oh my God. It was insane. But it was another moment where it was like these expectations and these stereotypes were subverted. And now, she can have like femme struggles because everyone will always assume she's straight. And another character that they also kind of subverted those expectations with is April, who, and I'm going to bring up Booksmart just one more time, reminds me of Hope in Booksmart, which was Amy's love interest in the movie. And she was like the bully, and she was mean, and she was horrible. She wasn't a Republican. That's just April, but definitely kind of have the same vibes where your expectations of this character are so subverted because of how April acts towards Sterling once they start becoming a thing. Like when you see them doing like the kisses into the phone, like that is crazy. That character just did a full, 180 and just became someone so soft and so, and one thing I still cannot wrap my mind around is that she's a gay Republican. Why is she Republican? It's like mice voting for cats. Like, come on. Snails for salt. Like, oh my God. But it's just funny, and it's another way that my expectations were subverted, because obviously after seeing in the pilot episode where April was like, yeah, I'm in Young Republicans, I am a part of the Straight Alliance. And I was like, oh my God, this girl is insane. And then when they were at the arcade and she was like, yeah, I'm a lesbian, yeah, I'm cool with it, I'm cool with God, like, I was like, wait a damn minute, you mean she's like totally and fully has accepted herself, but she's still like in the Straight Alliance, and she's still in Young Republicans, and because I was expecting like not for her to be like confident in her sexuality, which is again like another moment where they fully subverted my expectations of this character and ultimately made a richer character because of it. And that's what's so cool about this show, is that these characters are so they're so rich, and they're so multi-dimensional and interesting, and like the way that I'm still thinking about like April being a Republican and how it doesn't make any sense to me, but how I can like kind of put the pieces together and obviously see that it's part of her upbringing, but also part of her being closeted. There's so much there to kind of break down and think about, and especially like in our times right now, to think about people who are in the LGBT community, but also are like identify as Republicans or live as Republicans in their area, or like they don't feel safe to not be a Republican. It's kind of interesting to like kind of open up minds to those kinds of conversations and those kinds of situations, because not everybody, can be liberal and be out and proud or whatever. So it was interesting. And I one thing that I really appreciated about the show, one thing that really, kind of cemented it for me as a show that is worth every bit of hype and every minute of watching it over and over and over again. So I loved it. And another thing that I loved is also talking about April is kind of the attention to detail that the show has, where like in terms of building characters without actually telling the audience about what the character is like, like when April and Hannah B and Ezekiel are standing in the Ross parking lot, which is so funny, but also like such a small, not that they live in like a small town, but it really feels like one of those like Christian community or small towny kind of things. Like it feels very Midwest for me, because I grew up in Indiana, and obviously the best thing to do on a weekend is go to Target, and you just go and you hang out at Target. And that feels like what they were doing. They were just hanging out in a like Ross parking lot. But they had branded cups, which is like something that, doesn't happen a whole lot. They had Chick-fil-A cups, and I'm like, yeah, that checks out. Of course they eat homophobic chicken. Of course they do. Oh my God. But it just like adds that other element to this character where I make an effort. I haven't eaten Chick-fil-A in like 2 years because I just don't want to, and I don't want to support them. But, for this character, when I see that, I'm like, oh, duh, of course she would eat Chick-fil-A. Of course this person would eat Chick-fil-A. This straight Alliance Young Republicans person would eat Chick-fil-A like every day. And another thing is like Sterling and Blair driving like a hybrid to save the environment. And it's, the show didn't have to tell me. I mean, later they said, during like interactions with their grandpa and stuff like that. But the show didn't have to tell me that that they're liberal or whatever. You just look at the car they're driving. You just look at, different things about them, which is really cool. That the show, doesn't have to say. You could just show, which is obviously what TV is all about. But sometimes shows don't do that. They don't follow that rule. But this one did, and I loved that, like the character building and like kind of the character design, like how they look and how they dress, and it was really cool. And especially because it's hard to do that. Build these kind of characters when you're working within the confines of a school with uniforms. And that's one thing that is really difficult to do, because there's like 4 things that your characters can wear. But it all depends. It's like, dependent on how they wear them, how they wear their hair, what kind of makeup they're wearing. And you can still have that individuality even with the school uniforms. And I think that's something that's really cool about the show, is that even though everybody's wearing the same damn thing, you still understand that Blair is kind of more alt. She's like edgier, and she's got the hair, and she's got the makeup, and Sterling is like more kind of like sunshine and rainbows. Like if they were those 2 houses, you know what I'm talking about? That one meme where it's like the black house, the house that's like painted totally black, and then the house that's painted like purple and pink. That's Blair and Sterling. And at school, that can be something that's really hard to convey, but they did it. Like they managed to convey that really well, and I thought it was really cool. And one thing that I also loved about the show is that even though the show is about bounty hunting, and two of the main characters, well, 3, but 2 of the main characters are teenagers who are bounty hunters, the main drama and the main like core of the show and the like things that have the highest stakes is like the high school drama. which is so cool because obviously that's what high school feels like. And I think that this show, despite how, unrealistic the concept is, it's like a perfect example of what high school feels like. You have these two characters who can go out on a school night and hunt down a convicted felon who is running from the cops. But still, the most stressful thing, and the thing that they're talking about when they're bounty hunting, the thing that they're thinking about, what's got their attention, is what they're going through at school and what they're going through with their peers. I think the perfect example of this is when they caught that guy who was like naked at the motel, and he was like, they had to catch him when he was naked. And Sterling, immediately after they get him, is talking to his like wife, and she's like, well, how do I know if I'm like into women? And that is so funny because she's like, listen, girl, I just my husband is going to jail and he is naked. I think I think we shouldn't talk about this. But it's great because it's just like, it's really cool, and it's a really fun metaphor for how high school actually feels, because everything feels so heightened, everything feels so high stakes and feels so insane, even though the stakes are clearly very high in bounty hunting. Like, and I think, the finale kind of finally kicked it up to a 10, but it still had those elements of like family. When they finally get to that point where Sterling is kidnapped in the finale, it's still not even necessarily about bounty hunting being the highest stakes. It's about like, all the lies kind of coming to a head, and then, secrets within a family and how that can tear a family apart, and how all of that stress can really impact a whole family. So I thought that was really cool. And another thing that they just did so well on the show was the sister relationship between Blair and Sterling. I have a sister, and we fight like that, and we get along really well, and we talk about everything, and it just felt so realistic and so fun, and just such an important relationship to see on television. And especially because obviously later we find out that they're cousins, technically, like they're not actually twins, they're cousins, but because of how they were raised and how they were raised to believe that they're twins, that's what makes you family. Just how you're raised and who you grow up with and what kind of relationship you have. It's not about the title, it's about the relationship that you share. And that's something that's really cool, that the show really kind of focused on. And I really appreciated that about the show. Also, shout out to how they would always play female country artists during Sterling and April's scenes. I loved that. I think the soundtrack for this show was really cool. The different music that they were playing, and the different music that different characters would listen to. It was really like self-explanatory. And like when Blair would listen to that like music, like that like heavy metal like screamo music that Miles listened to when she missed him, like that was something that was like clearly telling about Blair's character. And Sterling, oh my god, when she played, listen, that was insanity when she played Slow Burn at the party. Oh my god. And while April was flirting with Luke, that was insanity. That was insane. That is like peak gay drama. That was insane. It was so good though, and I loved all the Casey Musgraves that happened in the show. I think there was some Maren Morris in the show, so it was really good. I loved it. I loved the music. I think it was really cool. So speaking about the finale a little bit, obviously there was a lot of twists and turns and jaw-dropping moments. Like my jaw was literally on the floor. I was like, oh my god. I had no idea, and nobody spoiled it for me, which was so cool. I had no idea it was coming. But one thing that I really did love about the finale was how Sterling knew what to do when she was kidnapped. And that is something that obviously does not happen in media a lot, because I don't think people know what to do when they're kidnapped. I listen to a lot of Crime Junkie, which is like one of my favorite podcasts ever, and they always talk about like Crime Junkie life rules and stuff. And this entire sequence of Sterling not making a scene originally, she finally did, and then of course it got her phone thrown out the window. But after that, about how she was like, you know what, let's stop at the rest stop. And she knew exactly how to play her cards, because the thing that made Dana pull over was that she said she was acting like her sister. That is brilliant, because that is exactly that's exactly how you get to somebody. You say, oh my God, you're acting just like your sister, or like you're acting just like your mom. Like, oh my God, that's the first thing that will make them do exactly not what they're doing. And so once she got there, she knew that her card was like running low. Her checking account was running low. So she just kept swiping it and swiping it and swiping it. And even if the card hadn't been running low, they could have tracked her credit card statements anyway. So that was really smart to do that, and to just like keep swiping, and to get that candy that's Blair's favorite, but Sterling hates them, and then to lead into the trail and then do the lip gloss oh my God, it was so good. And then just to like, it was really cool, because it just felt like a how-to, not necessarily a how-to, but kind of like some cool tips for if you ever get kidnapped. It just feels like what to do, not what not to do, but like literally what to do, like. So that was really cool. I really liked that. I thought it was really awesome, because it felt really empowering, and you're like, yes, you're doing all the right things, like yes, because you know, like horror movies or whatever, like nobody does any of the right things, so you're like, no, why would you open that door, you know? But with this show, you're like, yes, she's doing everything right, they're gonna catch her, they're gonna do it. It was so cool. And also, talking about the finale, I love Bowser. He's my dad. The found family aspect of the show is so cool. And the way that Bowser, in the middle of him saying that the girls were distracting and that they were annoying and that they were this and they made him soft, then Blair calls him and he picks up immediately. He doesn't even let it ring twice. And that was something that was really cool. And it just goes to show like how important they became in his life, and then also how important he became in their lives. And so that was really awesome. I loved that. And I obviously just like love the found family aspect of the show with Bowser and Yolanda, and obviously the drama between the two of them was really fun. So yeah, I loved that. And also about the finale, just, oh my God, I had like 4 moments where my jaw was like on the ground. First of all, when April found out, or when Sterling found out that April's dad was out of jail, and he asked about them, because obviously he knew that they were the ones who got him arrested. Whew. When your kind of girlfriend is the one who put your dad in jail. Big yikes. And then also in that moment where Sterling had texted Blair and was like, hey, I'm with mom, don't worry about it. And she looks, and Blair reads the text, and she says she's with you. And the mom is at home. Oh my God. I lost my mind. When I tell you that I lost my mind, I lost my mind. My jaw was on the floor. I was like, everything makes sense now. Like everything clicked. It was so cool. And then, I also had another obviously jaw drop moment when they did the twin telepathy with the aunt and the mom, with Debbie and Dana. I thought that was so crazy. I'm like, oh my God, they have it too. That's crazy. And when they were talking, and I was like, oh, no, because I figured it out. I was like, no, Sterling is her daughter. No. And then she said it. And I was like, no. Oh my God. It's insane. It's insane. It was so good though. That finale was like one of the best finales I've ever seen. It was awesome. It like kicked up to a 10. It was so good. And it just like wrapped up the mystery so well because everything makes sense. And I hope Bowser got to collect that $90,000 reward out on Dana. And I'm like, yeah, come on. Like the mom wouldn't do that. But I think it's also interesting how they tried to protect Dana, which I mean makes sense, but come on. If she's like so dangerous that especially because they originally thought when Sterling and Blair went to that town, they originally thought that Dana had kidnapped them in the first place. Like, if you thought she was so damn dangerous, why not just turn her in then? Like, then it had to lead to Sterling actually getting kidnapped, which was insane. But yeah, so I think overall the show is so fun. It's really sex positive. It's really, it's just a perfect teen dramedy to make you feel good. It's like a feel good show. It's really fun. It's, the representation is interesting. It sure is interesting. Blair is great representation. I don't know about April. I'm on the fence about April. When she stops being in Young Republicans, then I can stand. But until then, she's on thin ice. And you know what? I mean, as much as I do love to joke, and I mean, obviously, like joking about April and being a Republican, this show really genuinely is incredible representation, which I wanted to like kind of make it serious for a moment and kind of talk about that because, I mean, you know, there's a lot of shows where the LGBT characters are unbelievably unsure of themselves, and there's a lot of experimenting that happens, and there's a lot of hemming and hawing about their sexuality, and there's a lot of like discovery that goes into all of that. And sometimes, you know, for LGBT people, like maybe you don't want to to experiment or go through any of that. And you know, I think that sometimes, you know, people get caught up in writing those kinds of stories where, you know, the characters really have to like figure themselves out, and they have to, you know, they don't know, and there's no labels put on them, which can be frustrating for viewers because a lot of LGBT people really rely on labels to feel seen and understood and to kind of define themselves in a way that makes sense to them, which is really important. So for April, for her to say, you know, very firmly, like there was no storyline of her being like, oh my God, you know, I have no idea what's going on. Like it wasn't. What was really cool about April's storyline was that it wasn't a storyline about April denying Sterling because she was scared of herself, like, you know, because she was scared of her sexuality and her feelings. It was cool because April was really confident in her sexuality and in her feelings, and she even used the word lesbian, which is so cool because that hardly ever happens. And so that's something that I found really, really interesting about the show, and something that's really cool about April as a character, and I feel like why a lot of people you know, really attach themselves to her as a character. And I don't know, I think that was such a cool moment, because then the conflict ultimately, you know, it doesn't come from April's self-hatred or self-loathing or like any kind of internalized homophobia or anything like that. It comes from external sources, which honestly makes it more heartbreaking, because then you're like, she knows what she wants, and she knows who she wants, and she knows, you know, how she wants to be able to act with Sterling, and how she, you know, like she wants to hold her hand and she wants to sleep next to her at the lock-in, but she knows due to like the external factors of her life and of her situation that just can't happen, which just, like I said, it kind of makes it even more heartbreaking because she's just trapped inside of the closet, basically. And that's something that's really, upsetting about her story, and especially seeing her during that finale at the party with Luke. I mean, it's sad because it's like she knows that she's leading Luke on. Like, she knows that she does not have any kind of feelings for Luke, that she said that she's a lesbian, she doesn't like men, and she's basically just doing that for self-preservation at this point, and it's just really sad. It's such a sad story, and it's definitely something that so many people can relate to. So many people who are closeted, who, they just like can't be themselves, and you just want like a little bit of reprieve, and that's what Sterling kind of offered for April. But ultimately Sterling, on the other hand, she knows what she wants, and she also knows that she's willing to necessarily give up everything for it. I mean, not necessarily give up everything, but she's willing to sacrifice her comfort in the short term for her comfort in the long term, which is something that's really interesting about the two of them as characters and how they look at life, I think. Because I think for Sterling, she saw exactly what happened when she came out as not a virgin with Luke, and so she saw the effects of that, but she also saw how quickly it kind of dissipated. Like, yes, it was horrible. It was horrible for poor Sterling for so long, but she also was able to turn the narrative and twist it and kind of come out of it better and in a better place. And it happened fairly quickly, relatively speaking, for her. So I think she kind of saw that and was like, that was horrible. It was bad. It was terrible. But I am willing to do it again, because this is also something that I'm passionate about. That's what I think about Sterling, is that she's so passionate about her identity and just being herself and being able to be open about who she is, that that she is willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that she can have that kind of comfort in her life. And I think it also represents different dynamics that people have in their own homes, which is something that, kind of comes up a lot in the LGBT community, especially with relationships that ultimately kind of fall apart because people just don't have the same level of acceptance within their own lives, that it just makes it really difficult to, for one person who is like, listen, I know that you're cool hanging out in this closet, but I would rather like step out into the light and, be my own person and be honest and be open. And I know that I'm willing to put in the work to do that and to put in the pain, to go through the pain of that. And then you have also people like April who are like, the pain is not worth it. I'm living comfortably right now in my closet. And it's kind of reminds me a little bit of like Love, Simon, in a way, where he was dreaming of college. And I feel like that might be kind of April's mindset as well. I don't know for sure, obviously, but it feels like that's kind of something that she would kind of relate to, where she's like, what if I ended up in a college where I could be myself a little bit, because it's something that is so separate from the community that she's growing up in, and especially the high school that she goes to. And she even said in the show, she's like, word travels so fast around here. My dad would know like immediately. And if she, went to a college, like her dad would never maybe even necessarily find out, which is, something that I think she'd be very interested in, which is also something that's just like so relatable to so many people, because it's so hard to come out, and it's so hard to deal with changing people's perceptions of you with just like one sentence. And it's crazy because it's so much easier to like come out to strangers than it is to like come out to people who you love, because strangers don't know anything about you and it won't change anything when you tell them. But for somebody who has known you for like your whole entire life, like your parents, and for you to tell them something and it just like shatters their entire view of you and in their entire view of like your future potentially, it's just so crazy and so scary. So I don't know, I have a lot of admiration for April as a character, and I also have a lot of admiration for Sterling as a character, and I think it's really interesting to see them kind of have these different views. And of course there's really honestly no right or wrong necessarily either in their story, which is something that is also really interesting. Just because it's like, you know, you can understand so very clearly where April's coming from, and you can't fault her for changing her mind either. And the same thing with Sterling, where it's like, yeah, you understand where she's coming from as well. And it's also, you know, you can't push her. You can't, like, Sterling can't push April to come out because that's not fair to April. But also, April can't hurt Sterling on purpose because that's not fair to Sterling either. And so it's just such an interesting relationship and dynamic that they have. And hopefully when there's a season 2, I hope that in seeing their relationship kind of go further, I really genuinely hope that, because there's so much at this point to resolve. There's so much like left to resolve. There's, you know, in their own relationships. And then obviously Sterling's whole world just got like torn apart. And then like there's just so much that has happened from the moment that Sterling left the lock-in to, you know, where I assume that we would pick up for season 2, that it's going to be really interesting to see how, if they could even like mend their relationship, because there's so many questions that, you know, are kind of like left up in the air. It's like, well, there's also the issue of how Sterling was the one who put April's dad in prison in the first place. And it's like there's so much to their relationship that there's so many questions that are unanswered, and there's so many like what ifs and so many things where I don't know if their relationship could like last beyond some of these things, especially like the putting the dad in prison thing. Like that was bad. And now potentially, you know, April kind of hinted that obviously she didn't know that, but her dad had asked about the two of them. Like, hello, he obviously knows who got him put in prison. So is that who's going to be the villain of the next season? Like, and is it going to be a thing where it kind of reminds me of Supercorp in a way, where it's like, you know, obviously Lillian Luthor is like after Supergirl and Lex Luthor is after Supergirl, but Lena Luthor is on like Team Supergirl. Like, would April give up her Team Stevens to be on Sterling's side? Like, that's a question that I think remains so heavily within the show and within their relationship dynamic, which is so interesting, and it makes their relationship so interesting to watch, and also just like interesting to think about and speculate on for a potential season 2, which is really, I'm hoping. Fingers like so crossed. Yeah, just like follow the show, support the show, tell all your friends about the show, because it's great. I mean, I've already texted like multiple friends to tell them that the show is absolutely great and it's totally worth watching. And so that's all we can do at this point, is just, you know, like spread the word and keep rewatching, and you know, hopefully we get a season 2. Fingers crossed. So yeah, it's great. It's such a good show. I absolutely recommend it. Obviously we all got some, I have to talk about this because it's like the elephant in the room. We all got some really hard news on Tuesday about Supergirl ending. And I tweeted up some updates and stuff, and you can always hit me up on my Curious Cat if you have any questions for me about what's gonna happen going forward and stuff like that. But this show, Teenage Bounty Hunters, really definitely helped me out a lot over these past couple days to kind of get me out of my sadness about Supergirl. It's just a really fun, like funny, pick me up kind of show. So I absolutely recommend it. I would totally go watch it. And if you've already seen it, go watch it again. I know I'm going to. I'm absolutely going to watch it again. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. This was kind of a last minute thing to do, but I'm really glad I did it because I wanted to talk about the show. I kind of wanted to try and get some more word of mouth out there about the show, just because it is incredible and it deserves a second season, and I hope that it does. Like, if you're watching, use the hashtag Teenage Bounty Hunters on Twitter. Watch it again. Like I said, recommend it to all your friends. Just do what you can, and I hope that it does get renewed because it deserves at least a second season. It's phenomenal. But yeah, so if you like this episode, you can leave me a comment down below. If you're watching on YouTube, you can tweet me at Televised Pod. Let me know what you think. On iTunes, you can leave a rating or a review. That'd be really, really cool. You could follow on Spotify. You could subscribe on YouTube. Do all the things. And I will see you guys next time. Bye.